Hello, I'm Mandi McLeod. Welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Coming up in the show, research in agriculture. Are we really getting the full benefits from our agricultural brain bank? As the election debate heats up, we look at the potential changes to labour laws and the impact on our agricultural sector. And do we fund animal cruelty at our supermarkets? Vegan animal rights campaigner Dr. Balcom believes we do. Joining me today is Dr. Mark Paine, Strategy and Investment Leader at Dairy NZ, and Warwick Voyce, the CEO of FERTCO. Welcome. Mark, tell us a little bit about what you actually do.
My role is strategy and investment in the dairy industry. So Dairy NZ is responsible for the research and development strategy, and we're organised into 3 platforms. Productivity looks at cows and grass, the sustainability side, which includes disease control and the environment, and the area I look after is people and business. So employment issues, farm business management, a lot on education, both with universities and ag-ITO.
So you're kind of like the gatekeeper for funding into people and business, would that be right?
Well, it's probably pushing it a bit. I think it's, prefer to think of it as sort of like trying to pull together a strategy that's beneficial to farmers when they act jointly rather than 11,500 dairy businesses acting independently.
That's probably a better way to describe it then, isn't it? So, Mark, do you believe that, because I know that you've worked in Australia at the University of Melbourne, do you believe that in New Zealand we've got the right funding model for agricultural research? Especially, I guess, if you compare it to what's been happening in Australia and other countries.
Yes, it's a good question. I think that it's probably one of the reasons I came back, actually, was the funding model in New Zealand is now much better linked, I think, between strategy and the levy that farmers pay. So dairy farmers are paying 3.6 cents a kilogram milk solids. That's $50 million out of the pocket of dairy farmers, but it does attract about another 17 to 20 million, depending on what you're looking at with leverage funds. As an allocation, I think with the dairy industry being responsible for the priorities and really directing where that money goes, it's well linked to the needs on the farm now, and I think the farmer's voice is coming through a lot clearer. I think the other things are that better partnerships are forming between the universities, and the Crown Research Institutes are really focusing up a lot more on industry requirements as well. So, taken together, and the fact that the Primary Growth Partnership is a really good public-private partnership now with industry, we're in a very strong position compared to how we were 4 or 5 years ago.
Warwick, FERTCO is a relatively small organisation, and it could be argued that smaller business tend to be more agile and be more innovative. How do you manage to do that, and do you actually get access to any of the funds that are made available for research?
Well, maybe I will now. I've needled Mark a bit later. I guess small companies need to be innovative, and it comes down to what your value proposition is, and we have to be innovative for the simple reason that we've got to appeal to a segment of the market that has an appetite for innovation. So we tend to try and innovate for the innovator, if you like. So the guy on the farm that wants to do something a little bit differently, to either improve productivity, or they might have another motivation, whether it be environmental or whatever their motivation is. They tend to innovate themselves, so we try and be the mechanism, if you like, from a fertiliser perspective, to allow them to innovate through us, if you like. The difficulty that you get with regard to innovation is that you're really dabbling in the areas of the unknown, if you like. By definition, to innovate means to move away from what is currently considered to be bona fide science, or whatever you like. So there's a bit of a fine line there for a company, because you definitely you want to be considered reputable and do the right thing by your customers. So you can't push the envelope too far through innovation. The difficulty, I guess, little companies have, we have to innovate to survive. We have to move ahead of the pack. We have to continuously innovate. I guess the challenge that we have is bringing those new innovations into the real world with science, with some bona fide
into mainstream
science.
as opposed to just funding Fruit Loops.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, well, that's the danger, is that you fund Fruit Loops, and that's your problem, I'd say, on a day-to-day basis.
We try not to.
Yeah. As soon as we're really successful with something, as soon as something that we innovate and becomes successful, it becomes mainstream, the big boys get involved. So you have to innovate again. So, it's a process. It's an interesting place to live. But we deal with interesting people as a result, farmers that want to innovate.
Now, I just want to move on to, I guess, a little bit about the election. And one of the topics that's come up recently has been around the labour laws. And Labor, the Labor caucus, if you like, would like to see the minimum wage increased by at least $2 to $15 per hour and an increased level of unionisation. How do you think this is going to affect farmers at one level and then the farming industry at another level?
I did a bit of mathematics around this because it's a topic that's relatively dear to my heart. In that a small business, for example, our business, when you do the mathematics, you break it down. We don't have a huge amount of people on $13 an hour, but we tend to, if we're going to hire someone in the factory or in an office environment, they normally will start at the lower end of the scale. So you do have a few people on $13 an hour, I guess, or around that sort of area. What does it mean if we bump that up to $15 an hour? You do the mathematics and you figure out if you've got 6 people on $13 an hour, it costs you X amount of money. Money's a limited pool. We've got limited funds that we can use for employing people. If you bump it up to 15, it basically means, from a money perspective, the pool of money, where I'd normally hire 6 people, I'm down to 5.
Yep.
So money doesn't just materialise, unlike what the Labor government may believe. We've got a given amount of dough that we can fork out to hire these people. So where there was 6 jobs, there's now 5. And in a small business.
Do you see that being across the board now with farmers potentially doing the same? Or do you think that with farmers, they're not really focused on the minimum wage per se?
I think 2 things will happen. Well, if you go back to industry again, the more you scale that sum, the more the number, the greater the number comes of people that you can't offer jobs to. You take an example of someone like Fonterra. How many people have they got on $13 an hour? You go to 15, same
Some
pool of money.
people's going to lose out.
A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. There's a whole lot of other flow-on effects that I don't think that people consider. If you've got people on $15 an hour, and you start them on $15 an hour, what about that guy that's on $15 or $17 an hour now?
Their expectations are going to increase.
Yeah, so there's a huge flow-on.
I just want to quickly go now before we go to the break about the opinion of vegan animal rights campaigners believing that whilst most consumers abhor cruelty to animals, they're endorsing it every time they go to the supermarket. Do you think this is a sensationalist statement, Mark? Should they be more aware of how their eggs are produced, for example, given that we've got Dr. Annie Potts from the New Zealand Centre for Human Animal Studies saying that chickens display the full gambit of emotions?
Yes, I do think it's sensationalist, but I think it depends on what's bundled up in that word cruelty. And I think it's a different issue to saying knowing the traceability of the product and appreciating where food's coming from, which is a very important thing. If the average consumer really understood what went on a farm and understood the values that farmers had with regard to stock sense and animal husbandry, I think a large part of the issue would go away. That I've met hundreds of farmers that have a really deep set of values about looking after the animal, and it's not just an animal welfare thing. It's a part of what it means to manage a farming system the right way, and those sort of comments I find just a bit of a disconnect from reality, to be frank.
Vegans are probably not a particularly good group of people to be commenting on chicken welfare because I guess they're not a consumer. The consumer will drive the behaviour. Every consumer that I know wants to think that the meat or the chicken, the beef that they're using or eating has been grown in a sustainable, friendly manner. And I agree with what you're saying. What you're saying is that, in my layman terms, is that a poor producer or someone that doesn't regard animal welfare as a poor businessman in the first instance is probably not going to be in business. So there's certainly a connection there with regard to good animal husbandry and profitability. So it's a bit common sense business to run a good poultry farm or a good pig farm or a good sheep and beef property.
I think what we can take from this is at least we know that our chicken is a happy chicken. The meat is actually produced from happy chooks, hopefully. Coming up after the break, go green labelling. It's not so green after all. So how do we decide if our bananas are truly environmentally correct? Everybody must accept the effects of irrigation, good or bad. Is this arrogance or inevitability? And 3 new Nuffield scholars have been announced. What does it mean for the winners and agriculture? We'll see you soon. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Going to the supermarket can be a torturous exercise at the best of times. We all want food that's safe for our families and friendly to the environment. Kath Dewa, a lecturer in green marketing at Auckland University and founder of Good Sense, says consumers don't always have the information to decide if a product is truly clean and green. Mark, what do you think about this? How often do you go to the supermarket?
Probably not enough to do my fair share around the house, but yeah, a reasonable amount.
And when you go there, generally you're in a hurry, you're trying to make decisions like that. How often do you look at a label that's put on a product that says it's green and really go into what that actually means?
Probably not often. Usually I'm struggling with the choice, the options that are there. If it's a special occasion, I might make the effort, particularly with, say, meat, to look at the point of origin, and certainly with wine, I take a bit of time on that.
Mark, Kath also believes that this is influencing consumer buying decisions in the US and Europe, where they're sick of being ripped off because they can't tell the difference between green labelling. Do you think this is something that's happening here in New Zealand, and is there an opportunity for us to take advantage of that?
I'm not sure to what extent that it's happening here in New Zealand, but I do know that looking at organic production in Europe about 5 years ago, there was a very clear separation between, if you like, the fanatics that followed organic production to almost as a philosophical belief, and those that were moving into organic production as a commercial viable option for the future. And the ability of the consumer to distinguish between those two positions on organics was quite difficult. So I guess if consumers are wanting to really philosophically align themselves with similar thinking producers, it's important from that angle. From a New Zealand point of view, I think that the way we need to look at it is in 2 areas. One, learn from the French around appellation control, and can we value add by taking back to a point of origin. And I think if you look at the gimlet gravels in terms of wine production, it's a classic example of that. We could do more of that on specialty milks and specialty breeds of sheep and cattle and so forth. I think also the second point is around nutrition, and that's where my partner spends a lot of time looking at labels in terms of nutritional value, and being a lot more transparent about what's really going into a product's important, I think.
I believe that one of the points that was being made in the article was, and I'll use bananas for example, because we've seen the introduction of fair trade bananas. And fair trade is an apolitical organisation that decides whether products have been produced in a sustainable, environmentally friendly manner, versus another brand of bananas which stuck a green label on their bananas. When they went in and did the research behind that, it was really about that company, not the fair trade ones, but that company trying to say that they do things for the community where they produce their bananas. It wasn't comparing apples with apples. So how do consumers, I guess, go in and really decide, if they're buying bananas, for example, what they're really getting?
Ooh. So were you suggesting that the second banana with the green labelling weren't living up to their value, what they were portraying as their values? Is that
the consumer didn't know what was behind those two labelling?
Okay, so there might have been some degree of misleading labelling,
yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'd like to see a lot more country of origin sort of labelling in New Zealand. If we want to choose what country we buy a product from, that may support us, or we may have a perception that they are cleaner and greener than the other, then I'd like to see a lot more of that. How does the consumer therefore go and find out if they line up ethically with what the thing is produced? I guess it's down to the company to put those values out there in the marketplace and say this is what this label stands for, and to back it up. I guess that's about the only way you can do it.
So potentially there is an opportunity for New Zealand to follow the French, etc. All right, what about with fertiliser? I was recently in the States, and there's certainly an argument from the more organic side of the field that when people buy particularly phosphate fertiliser, they are mining, raping, pillaging phosphate sources. Now, I know, and probably you know, that that's not always the truth. But how do we get into consumers and tell them that the fertiliser is coming from a renewable source? How do you do it?
Well, I don't know if any fertiliser comes from a renewable source. Fertiliser, phosphate, for example, comes from million-year-old deposits of shark's teeth and bones and so on. So it's not renewable, but it is over a few million years. I guess as far as anything's concerned, what we try and focus on as a little company is the probably efficiency of the fertiliser use that you use. So trying to make a non-renewable resource go as far as it possibly can. And we try and put that out into the marketplace and talk to people about that. And that's about all we can do, really, at the end of the day, I'd say.
Okay, 3 new Nuffield scholars have been announced: Sandra Faulkner, Richard Fitzgerald and Michael Taylor, with study topics ranging from strong wool, farmer capacity development and sustainable farming practices in the arable sector. Mark, from an extension point of view, what do you think Nuffield really means? It's quite a prestigious award. Do we in New Zealand really look at it as a viable extension tool?
I think it's probably one of our preeminent leadership programs in New Zealand for agriculture. It's we look to Nuffield scholars as bringing back new knowledge, and I'll probably preempt you in terms of saying we probably don't use them enough, and we're rethinking that next week. Beef and Lamb and ourselves and other industry groups are getting together to really ask how can we better utilise what Nuffield scholars are coming back to New Zealand with.
Irrigation and water sustainability, water use management is obviously a topic that gets covered quite a lot with Nuffield. Now, recently in the South Island, there has been quite a bit of talk about irrigation water and whether, as the dairy industry, they have got the use or the ability to use the water any way they want because they're too big and no one's going to stop them. Coupled with an article that was written by one of the Federated Farmers members down there, which suggested that if you live near to an irrigation area, you've got to put up with the impacts of irrigation, whether they're good or bad. What do you guys think about that? Is that just arrogance on behalf of that community, or is it inevitability?
There's a little bit of arrogance in there by the sound of it. Like all businesses, we have to, in a farming sense and in any business sense, you've got neighbours, you've got people that are affiliated with what your business is. My attitude really is, and I think that these guys should probably take the same sort of attitude, this is a trade and not a fight.
Because it does worry me when I hear people saying that with irrigation you've got instant grass. You know, between watering and nitrogen, you can have grass within 48 hours. Which gives the South Island, I guess, or particularly the Canterbury region, quite a competitive advantage over the rest of the country. So how do we manage those expectations down there? Because if they're used to that, how are we going to back them off and ask them to become more sustainable and more responsible?
Well, I'm not sure if we're asking them to back off. I think we're asking to jointly work, and this comes back to Warwick's point about innovation with farmers, that we're actually exploring new futures here, and it's about using the best and brightest brains in the country to create those new futures. So what we do when we're moving into new land types is certainly hear all the arguments, put the alternative goals up and work through those, but we need to have a lot of research and development in terms of new farming systems to cope with what we're sort of opening up as new possibilities for the country.
I really like that. We're going to ask Mark and Warwick after the break what's got them fired up. Is it going to be a rant? Will it be a rave? Join us after the break to find out. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. It's time now for our weekly rant and rave. Mark, you look like you're full of passion. What have you got for us?
Well, a rave. I was invited to a a workshop in Europe about a month ago, and it was a very interesting workshop. It was looking at the trends in agricultural production and food production globally. So there were people from every continent in the world. And I was overwhelmed with the negativity of first world countries about their agriculture and where they were heading, the difficulty of bringing young people back into agriculture. I just felt so proud of New Zealand being there, because I think we've turned the corner on young people being attracted back into the industry. We've got farmers getting up, organising their own networks. Dairy Women's Network has over 3,000 members now. Young Farmers is going from strength to strength. Mm-hmm. And we've even got, as you know, the Small Herds group standing up and being counted now. So this ability of New Zealand farmers to get up and do something about their future is, I think, one of the great things of New Zealand. And if I was going to do a little rant, it would be, why don't the public wake up to that and actually back these people as key, really important people in terms of the New Zealand community as a whole.
Maybe it's because we don't tell them enough. And it's really interesting you say that, because I was recently in the States presenting at a conference around bringing young people in to our agriculture sector. And what I was talking to them around was the use of our equity partnerships as a model. And that's quite a foreign concept to the rest of the world as a way. And the same with our share milking models and things like that. And it's quite a concern, I think, actually, like in New Zealand, we've got the dairy industry that's really taking on those. The sheep and cattle industry is still kind of stuck in more traditional models. So I still think we've got a lot of work to do, but I do think it's really exciting how we are moving forward. And maybe it's because we don't have any subsidies. Who knows?
Oh.
Warwick.
Well, that sort of ties in quite nicely with my little rant. Recently, FERTCO publishes a little newsletter. We sent it out to all our customers, our customer base, and in that I offered a sponsorship of a student going to, or a scholarship going to university or higher learning. What I was looking for was a school leaver that FERTCO could offer a scholarship to, and I got a grand total of no replies. I was highly disappointed. So my little rant was, come on, do you not want my money? I've offered up this dough, but I think maybe I need to extend it a bit further to just from the FERTCO customers. So if you do want to apply, if you're a young person and you want to apply for my little scholarship, email warwick@fertco.co.nz and tell me why you deserve my dough.
How old do you have to be young?
You're probably borderline, Mandy.
I'm not quite sure of a school leaver either, but anyway,
No,
you got my thinking. Going back to Dairy Women's Network, they are doing a really awesome thing at the moment. They are promoting quad bike safety, and they are like you. They're saying that they're not getting enough people to come along to their field days to learn about quad bike safety, which I think is quite shocking, really. So if you're out there and you want to go to a quad bike safety day, get onto the Dairy Women's Network website. You can Google it and check it out and get along, because I have to say, quad bike safety is a no-brainer, we think. Don't we?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But isn't it amazing how when you get on a quad bike, it's like you leave your common sense and your brain behind?
Yeah, well, the industry needs to probably go along and do a bit of that too. I mean, we quite often have FERT reps and whoever, these extension people jumping on the back of bikes with no regard for their own safety. So probably we need to take a leaf out of that.
So maybe we should be having helmets for... That's a really good point, actually, because you don't think about that. Even myself, when I go out on farms, you sit on the back of a quad bike and you trust that your client, or if you're on the front of the...
Well, maybe we're scared of offending the guy that's going to ride the bike. We strap ourselves into safety gear before we jump on. Maybe we just need to get over that a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, why don't people wear helmets? Mark, any thoughts? Is it not cool?
Just the inconvenience, I think, of putting it on, putting it off. But it's a behaviour change thing, just the same as having helmets when you're cycling as a kid. You know, when I was at school, you didn't even think of it. We'd never think of our kids going out without helmets now, so it'll come. It just takes a lot of time and effort to get there.
Yeah, do you think we need to be, as an industry, like Warwick's saying, a lot tougher and having it as a, it's come into law now?
I think it's number 2 in terms of ACC claims in agriculture. Is that right? It's a massive cost to the country.
Well, as being a proud, not so proud, I should say, flipper of a quad bike on flat ground, going in a straight line. Yeah, exactly. Probably a Darwin Award in there somewhere. It is so easy to happen.
It is.
So, Okay, I also just want to congratulate the 3 Nuffield scholars. Congratulations, you're part of the club now, and I look forward to having you on the show in the next year to tell us about what you've been doing. Now that wraps up our latest edition of Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'd like to thank my guests Mark Paine and Warwick Voyce very much, and thanks to you too for watching. Remember to check out our website. I love hearing from you. We'll catch you next week, and in the meantime, keep on smiling.